From the world of AV programming and control with James King, I'm Steve Greenblatt, and this is Ask the Programmer. James, it's great to be back with you for another episode where just you and I were going to talk about some interesting programming topics.
Oh, it's always great to be back, Steve. And yep, looking forward to having our discussion as we our listeners listen in.
Absolutely. One of the things that we're trying to do here is maybe cover some of the common challenges and common experiences that programmers and integrators and technology managers all experience. And one thing that we all have to deal with is how do you actually close out a project and make that clean and not make that a bumpy process. So that's really what we landed on for today. And it's something that I think everybody should be able to relate to, and something that we all probably have had some successes and some failures with. So James, you're kind of been on both sides of the fence a little bit. You've had the programming side of it, but also been on the receiving end of a project and have to deal with that handoff. And we talked about that on a previous episode. But what are some of the things that you think are important to make sure that a good amount of attention is paid to when it comes to closing out a project? And we'll try to stay as close to the programming realm as possible, but this is going to expand a little bit, I'm sure.
Yeah, I can definitely see this going many different ways, but trying to keep it more pointed at the programming. And I think a couple of the key elements I look for when closing out a project is, one, making sure that you fully commission the code, meaning that you test it every button, you test it every scenario that you might put the system in, that it functioned the way it's supposed to. We all tend to go, oh yeah, it's going to work because we wrote it, we know it's going to work, but then it may actually not work the way we intended it to. So actually putting it through its paces. To dive more into that, what I like to do on that end is I like to take someone who has no skin in the game, no knowledge of the code, put them in the room and be like, break it. Run through the system and have them actually test the system out. Because going back to my notion of we wrote the code, we know how it works. We may know, oh, we got to do X, Y, and Z. And our user might do Z, Y, A and break the system. Because I've actually had that happen on a project that was written by someone else, where I went in and started testing the system and I locked the system up. I reported it back, and the response I got back was, well, you didn't do it right. My response was like, I know programming, and if I didn't do it right, what is my users going to do? So was definitely got to look at that avenue. And probably another avenue, which we all, I want to say, fall short on. I know I'm a big component of falling short on this, is documentation and code management. Those are my way I like to close out projects.
I think the first one is really pretty critical in terms of the testing, because I think that we all are biased when you write code, but we're also biased because we look at a system differently, as you mentioned, and it's not necessarily the same way that somebody would come up and operate the system who didn't know or wasn't maybe technically comfortable, or they were also just somebody who was very much a novice to dealing with something of this nature. So to your point, the order that you hit buttons and also what a button means to you versus to somebody else, they could be very different things. But the different orders and even the speed in which you press the buttons are, as we all know, is very critical. The other thing that I'll touch on is that even if we're making the most uh, small innocuous change to code, we also have to go through and test everything, because you never know what issue you might introduce. And
Yep.
and this may be very tedious and something that is going to weigh down a programmer, but I always recommend having some type of a checklist that says I went through all of these items in order to say that you've fully tested the system. And probably do that every single time you upload something, even though none of us do that. I'm going to be honest, but that would be ideal. So if we could get somewhere in between, that would be a great thing. But as you said too, um, proper documentation and code management is really critical, because if you think you have the source code and you don't have it, even though it was turned over, that is the worst case scenario. You're almost better off not having the source code if you don't have either the most up-to-date one, or don't know what the files that you have mean.
Oh, yeah, I definitely, I'll admit, is going back to what you're talking about, is, that we don't always test when we make minor changes. I'm a big stickler for that. I actually am one who will do a full test of the system, because I've been bitten by that, where I did make a small change and it's like, oh, wait, it impacted this, even though it shouldn't have, but it did. So I'm a big stickler now of, oh, even if I'm just changing a volume control, I'll test and make sure the display is turned on and all that other avenues that we need to make sure that the system are working, just so we don't get burned. And then coach management is definitely key, because I don't know how many times you're looking for okay, what version is it? All right, do I have the latest version? Oh, I made a change in this and it actually broke. Is there something I can recover back to? So definitely is a something I need to work better on, code management, but it's definitely something that's important.
So that actually kind of takes us down, which we knew this was going to happen, takes us down a couple of different rabbit holes. But one thing that I like what you said is have somebody else test your system for you. And perhaps maybe that's like a junior person. And if their goal is to break it, I think that they're going to test it a lot differently than somebody whose goal is to get done by a certain time, or has a little bit of a different perspective. If your job is to find the problems, then you're going to probably be a lot harsher. And sometimes project problems are relative or subjective, but it's great to have somebody. It's great to find an issue before the user does.
100%, I agree with that. And also, I like the term "tried to break it," because now you're challenging the person. So they are going to do something crazy to try to break it. Because it's almost like the notion out there that they put out to hackers is like, try to hack our system. Now you're challenging hackers. It's just same with programming. It's like when we put our code out there and we ask someone, try to break this. It's they're gonna try, oh yeah, I can prove you wrong. You messed up. Like it's almost a competition to them,
Mhm.
and they want that. So it actually makes them want to try to break your system instead of, oh, I'm just hitting buttons and making sure the system working. This is very mundane. Now you kind of make it a game for them, and you get a little more positive feedback on that.
I like the idea of the hacker, because that is, if you think about it, maybe that's a role for somebody. Be the AV hacker.
I'm sure they're out there.
And we mean this in the nicest way. Um, the other side that you mentioned, I think, is also important, is that version management, and I think it comes in a couple of different forms. As you said, you want to be able to, if you make a change, have something to roll back to. Um, that I think that when you're in the development phase, it's saving some interim versions, even if they're just throwaway. And so that when you try something in your code, you have a history, and that could be done um, a couple of different ways. It could be done manually, where you're just saving versions, or it could be using some type of a source code management system, which we'll probably talk about in a future episode, where it does some of that tracking for you, and can document the changes from one version to another. You check in and you check out the code. But the the importance, I think, to this conversation is knowing what's the latest version, and knowing what changes were made in that version, and knowing that when you're going to make an update, and sometimes an update can be months or years later, you know that what you have is going to be a good basis to start from. And that's a very tricky situation historically in the AV control space, is that the code, it's almost, you almost have to make sure that you're checking back and revisiting that code, even if you don't need to make changes to it, just to know that it's going to still be valid with a new software version or something of that nature. It's not something that I have as much experience with, because a lot of times we would be on the front end of getting the code to a certain point, the project to a completion, and some a little bit of aftercare. But I'd imagine in your situation, it becomes a lot more critical.
Oh, yeah, I mean, we gotta make sure our equipment's working, because and with the right code version and all that stuff, because we may be stuck with this equipment for 10 years. So technology changes, updates come out, new firmware. So making sure that that code can actually play nice with the latest technology that's coming out is definitely beneficial. But the only way you can do that is, one, testing it, or also making sure you are revisiting the code, like you're saying, yes, okay, this will work on this version, and no, it won't work on this version. Now we got to update this.
I wonder if anybody out there can chime in on this. Some of our listeners, is this something that you do? Is there such a thing as a code audit, where you're going through maybe once a year and making sure that you have all the code, it matches up with what's in your processor, but also that it still compiles and it still is it's valid, and it's something that you can build upon? Because the biggest fear is when you need to make a change, no matter how big or small it is, and you don't have that foundation to build upon.
Agree.
I'd be
I think,
curious to hear
oh,
of others' experiences.
yeah, I would love to hear what our users have to say, our listeners have to say about this.
Um, any other thing that you think is important from a closeout perspective? I have one or two that I can chime in on, but anything come to mind for you?
Um, I, I would say most important is your closeout procedure needs to be thorough and documented that anyone can do it. Because I mean, I know in my environment, once we build classrooms, they're technically we don't revisit them unless we're upgrading them or making changes. That might be a year, that might be 5 years, might be 10 years. So remembering that closeout process, thoroughly testing, making document, updating repository, all that stuff is very important. And part of that documentation, that procedure, making sure everyone following the same steps is also where everything is, where's the documents are, where the code repository is, and all, and how to find it.
The thing that I would add to that too is making sure that when you make an update, you go and update the documentation and update the drawings, and have some type of a log, like almost like a maintenance log that says this is what was changed and these are the new versions. Because having one version of one and one version of another, it still puts you in some hot water. So I've seen so many times where the code is updated, but maybe the drawings aren't, or we can't match up what is the latest that we're working with. So there's a number of gotchas there that really need to be thought through. I I wanted to add to that one more thing, and I'm curious to hear if you or others have thought of this, but is there a plan for um, handoff in terms of I know that we normally would look at maybe user training, but is there a handoff in terms of tech training, whether it's walking through the technical aspects of the system with who's going to maintain it, and sometimes that's the same company, or the what programmer is going to maintain the code. I my experience has been in the corporate world that a lot of times the person hired to take on the system is not involved during the development and the construction and installation process, but just it gets inserted at the end, and then they get left with this very complex system that they don't really have a good handle on. So I don't know how much is thought through on that, and it's maybe the world's changing because there's a lot more in-house integrators.
I do think the world's changing, and I think that has to do with a lot of, there's a lot of factors playing to that, but let's take it towards our audience with the programmers. As I think what is we got bit too many times. The businesses got bit too many times. So they felt there was a need to bring in-house folks in.
So in that regard, I would just recommend that at least more than one person knows about how to like what work to be able to feel comfortable navigating a system and knowing what's what, and has a handle on, if I have to make an update to this code, am I comfortable with it? So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I think that's a good recommendation and probably a good place to stop.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, with that, how could people get in touch with you, learn more what you're up to, and also keep the conversation going?
Oh, easy enough. They can reach out on Twitter, AV_James King. I'm also on LinkedIn, anything with HEPMA, or again, Google me. You'll find me. I'm out there.
And so for me, you can reach me at Steve Greenblatt on social media. You can reach my company at controlconcepts.net. And like James said, please please keep the conversation going. We have a Twitter handle for our show now called AV Programmer Pod on Twitter. So please check that out, follow it, keep up touch with us. Our podcast is on YouTube as well as on Apple and Google Podcasts, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. Interested in what you thought of this episode, and also what ideas you might have for a future episode. And if you're interested in being a guest, please reach out to us about that as well. And with that, this has been Ask the Programmer.